This is episode 76 of Yoga Research and Beyond. We are talking about yoga and stretching for athletic recovery, one of my favorite topics these days. I'm your co-host, Ariana, founder of Yoga Research and Beyond, yoga teacher, a strength trainer in New York City, and co-founder of New York Stretch.
I am Jules Mitchell. I teach continuing ed for yoga teachers, mostly in the areas of biomechanics, anatomy, and research literacy, and of course, stretching. So that's my special topic dear to my heart, as it is Ariana's.
Ride or die. The title of this paper, Yoga versus Static Stretching. I'm so excited. You sent this to me to do. Yoga versus static stretching, recovery impact on male athletes post-HIIT, that's HIIT, high impact interval training, heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and heart rate variability analysis. It's from the International Journal of Exercise Science this year. I couldn't find the month. I don't know why, but it's from 2025. It's by Harutai Pettiset and 3 other authors at the School of Integrative Medicine and the School of Health Science at Mae Luang University in Thailand. Super cool. I think this might be the first paper I've read from Thailand, from people in Thailand. I'm personally interested in athletic recovery as a topic because it is definitely a buzzword. I definitely see it on social media, and it's something that a lot of my clients want, whether they are high performance athletes or weekend warriors or people running a marathon, all kinds of things. People want athletic recovery. And when I first started looking into it and reading papers about it, I realized there wasn't really an understanding of what that meant, or it's just kind of a big bucket of things that get thrown into what athletic recovery is. And like a working definition, and I can't really take credit. I use ChatGPT to help me like consolidate and come up with the wording and stuff based on different studies that I've looked at. So I'm going to give this, here it is. So athletic recovery is the process your body goes through to repair, restore, and return to optimal function after physical exertion, especially intense training or competition. It's not just rest. It's an active, strategic process of bringing the body and mind back to a ready state. It involves both physiological and psychological restoration and is essential for reducing fatigue, preventing injuries, improving performance, and maintaining long-term health and training progress. So that's where my understanding of athletic recovery is. It's a large bucket of things. And then I've got a list of some recovery methods that are out there. The most powerful one is sleep, good sleep, nutrition, beyond my expertise. So that includes rehydration, nutrition replenishment, stretching is in the bucket. The research is kind of mixed, restores muscle length and may promote relaxation. There's active recovery, which is light movement like walking, yoga, which can help circulation, massage and foam rolling, breath work or meditation, cold and heat therapy, also really popular these days. Red light therapy should be in here. It's not in there. Compression, hydration, and supplements. Those are all.
And massage?
Foam rolling goes under foam rolling. Yeah, that's in there. But yeah, I would just add the red light therapy. That's the one that I see a lot now too. I was going to add that in there. But yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff for athletic recovery. And this paper it's not looking at all of that. Obviously, it's looking at like one component of athletic recovery. And it's after high intensity interval training, specifically in male athletes. I would like to see research on female athletes too. So they want to see what's the purpose of this, to see what method is going to help the body recover. And they're looking at specific markers, which I don't always see these things when they're looking at athletic recovery, but that's okay. So they were analyzing heart rate, heart rate variability, respiratory rate, and blood pressure. Those are the markers that they're specifically looking at for athletic recovery. So it's a narrow slice of what athletic recovery can mean. I think like it's in the bucket of autonomic recovery, autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, and parasympathetic activity, because the increased heart rate is sympathetic activity. So it's like, can you down regulate after moments of stress? Because HIIT is a stress on the body, a good stress, but that's really what it's measuring, which I think is kind of nice, because in that bucket that you mentioned of recovery, there's a lot of different things and questions about how they're measured. It's like, is it good for circulation? How is that measured? I'm always wondering, like, how are we quantifying that? And so a lot of times it's just like, oh, it's rest. It's just how you feel the next day, but there are lots of physiological things that we can measure, like these four. And before you go on, I just will say that the sleep that you said as number one, we actually talked about this last weekend. I had a neuroscientist in my 300 hour. And she was doing a whole section on neurotransmitters and different neurotransmitters that the brain makes, the neuroendocrine system makes. And in the sympathetic side, it's the norepinephrine and it's acetylcholine on the parasympathetic side. And so she was talking about sleep being the number, not just because you're resting, but because that's when these neurotransmitters can replenish. And it was so satisfying to me, because now I have a specific understanding of what the sleep does for recovery. It's like, we all know sleep is good, but what is it doing? So
can you just say it again?
Yeah. Do you want me to say it again?
Yeah, I do. I want it to sink in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. So on the sympathetic side, it's the norepinephrine, because of course you need that for that readiness that you said. You need that to be able to exercise again. And on the parasympathetic side, it's the acetylcholine. And those are the neurotransmitters that your brain produces. So you might have heard me say in past things, like there's the neuroimmune system and there's also the neuroendocrine system. And so your brain actually produces these neurotransmitters that are used, for these activities, for increased heart rate, for decreased heart rate. And so that's what you're replenishing when you're sleeping.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to have to write those down and read about that more. That's really, really cool. So that's okay. That's sinking in. It's good. Yeah. It's good. Okay, so some methods. Let's go into some methods. They had 20 participants, all male, university athletes. Average age was 21. They were all at a moderate fitness level. This is a crossover study, meaning that all participants tried both the yoga and the stretching on different days. The exercise protocol was the HIIT session, the high intensity interval training session, which was running intervals at 85% of their max heart rate. The recovery methods, 15 minutes after the HIIT, there was the yoga group that had a guided session, which included breathing, relaxation, postures, child's pose, downward dog, warrior one, those kinds of poses. Stretching group, it's just a standard static stretching for key muscle groups, what I have here. So they looked at some measurements, which we talked about, the heart rate, how fast the heart rate can calm down afterwards. Heart rate variability is that nervous system readiness. So yes, it's that, can you meet the demands of what you're trying to do? Can you launch into those high intensity exercises when you need to? And then can the heart rate go back down? So you want to have that variability. Respiratory rate for relaxation, and possibly psychological recovery. It can be an indicator for that. And then the last thing that they're looking at is blood pressure, which they're looking for cardiovascular. So they looked at this before exercise, after, during recovery at 5 and 10, 15 minutes, and then 24 hours later. So lots of touch points that they were looking at those markers.
Yeah. I'd like to add something really quick, just Please. On the intervention side. So I thought it was really interesting that one of the exclusion factors was they couldn't have done yoga before. So yoga experience was excluded in order to reduce bias. And so they said that was because they wanted to make sure that the attributes of yoga were solely due to the intervention rather than the familiarity of the practice. And why was a regular stretching practice, not an exclusion factor. Just saying, I know it's kind of acting as the control, but then they do compare the two. And so it's, it is worth asking. And then one other thing, and I see this in so many yoga studies that I find so interesting is, so for the yoga session, participants were instructed to perform yoga postures for 15 minutes by a certified yoga instructor, right? Like that's essential, but then they don't even mention who teaches it in the stretching session. It's just so funny that it's like, it's always, we gotta be certified in order to do a yoga intervention, but you don't have to be a strength and conditioning coach or a personal trainer or, it just says the stretching session followed by ACSM's recommendation. Participants were instructed to engage in a 15-minute stretching session. Doesn't even say who taught it. Was it one of their friends? Was it one of the investigators? Who was it?
The YouTube video?
Yeah. So then just one more thing. So they were very, very, very similar. So that they had the yoga session had 2 minutes of breathing, and then the stretching session had 2 minutes of rest. I would have liked to know if they were both seated or if they were both supine, like what consisted. I didn't get that. Then they had 10 minutes of either yoga or 10 minutes of stretching. And then they had a 3-minute rest period for the stretch group and 3-minute shavasana, corpse pose, for the yoga session. And I'm really curious, again, in that rest period, were they supine and it just wasn't called corpse pose? Or were they, I would have liked a little bit of detail just so I could really compare the interventions.
Yeah.
That's all. Keep going.
Yeah, and that's kind of unusual to have that kind of structured rest
in a stretching session. Yeah. So is it a shavasana? Because, sometimes maybe it's the shavasana that is the recovery thing, has the greatest impact. Would have been nice to have a third arm,
Yeah, that would track actually that it's a
I think years ago, I saw a study on DOMS, on delayed onset muscle soreness, comparing yoga and stretching. And the yoga group had, a little bit of better results. And that was my hypothesis, was like, I wonder if it was just the shavasana at the end that had everyone just be more chill about everything. But I don't know.
Which that's such great. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I'm not sure.
Results. So yoga was a little bit better at reducing the respiratory rate during recovery, showing faster relaxation. Yoga improved heart rate variability a little bit more than stretching. But it's all minimal, really. But that's and both methods helped lower heart rate and blood pressure over time, but no significant difference between the two. And so, yoga appears to promote recovery. So does stretching.
And just a reminder that they were reporting on significant difference, which is not the same thing as effect size. I know we've talked about this in the past, but it's just a reminder. So they were basically reporting on if yoga was a little bit better on these two and that there was no significant difference, meaning that if they were to do it again, they'd get similar results. Not how strong, they weren't reporting on that. And again, it's just a problem with studies. But when you read it, if you aren't constantly have that drilled in your mind, the way that the wording is, unless you're a statistician, the wording makes sense. Well, it was significant. They, and it's not clinical significance; it's statistical significance, which is different. So just a reminder.
Good reminder for that, because I was leaning in that. Mm-hmm. I was veering away from that a little bit. So, so this study gives insight into how yoga and stretching can affect the autonomic nervous system after intense training, specifically through these metrics that they're looking at. But it doesn't measure other important aspects of athletic recovery, like muscle repair, inflammation, performance. So it doesn't cover the full picture of what this can do in terms of athletic recovery for athletes.
Yep. But I appreciate that they narrowed it down, because you don't want a study that has too many things that they're testing, because then you wonder if it's, your positive results are just by chance, because you have a lot of things, something's going to work out. So I appreciated it. I did think that it was interesting. Once again, this is, my rant always, is that they were basically saying that stretching facilitates the recovery process by enhancing baroreflex function, promoting relaxation, and so on. And then it says, we propose that the breathing patterns, the rhythmic muscle contractions, and the deep relaxation in yoga are the primary mechanisms that lead to greater facilitation. So to me, that's there's a lot of spin there, because yoga also enhances baroreflex. The mechanisms are the same. So then they had to come up with, stretching was just promoting relaxation, but yoga was deep relaxation. Like this is their, it's like, really, is it just the relaxation? And then, the breathing patterns. Okay, that's possible. I get that. But rhythmic muscle contractions. What is a rhythmic muscle contraction? And how is that different than, repeating a stretch a couple times? So they were holding the poses. Let's go back to they were holding the poses for 50 seconds and they were holding the stretches for 50 seconds. So how the yoga part was more rhythmic, like it's almost like, it almost has a sound like it was like a ballistic bouncing type thing, but the holds were the same.
Yeah.
But then we had, before I even got to that part, when I was just reading the methods and I looked at the poses and I was like, oh, child's pose and downward facing dog. I wrote in the margins inversion, thinking of the baroreflex, and then they were like, oh, okay. And they attributed that to stretching. So I think, how different from stretching is yoga.
Yeah.
The thread I'll always pull on, even though people don't like that.
Well, it's a good thread to pull.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good thread to pull. Some limitations. Again, this is a small sample size. 20 people, all male, which limits how widely the findings can be applied.
That said, I do think they did the backwards math to determine how many people they would need, and they did need 20. So It is a small sample size, but it is what they needed to meet their needs. So kind of cool.
Good.
Yeah.
I
remember reading that.
Okay. I'll take your word for it. I didn't do that. So they're looking at immediate recovery results in their metrics. So anything beyond 24 hours. So it's not looking at long-term effects on athletic performance. Those were the main things I have for what the limitations were. You did? Cool.
Yeah. They basically said that, basically they would need 20 participants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I have one other thing I want to say just about the discussion before we wrap up. And I think this is a very common thread throughout these discussions. Sometimes they're hard to follow their logic. It's just the way science writing is. And so I got a little derailed by their citing other studies that show there's a decrease in parasympathetic activity after resistance training, which makes sense. So there's an increase in sympathetic. But then later on, they started talking about vagal activity, and the vagus nerve is sort of known for its parasympathetic fibers, even though now we know that there are also many sympathetic fibers. But anyway, then they were citing another study in yoga where they were saying, oh, but Kapalabhati breathing decreases vagal activity. But if you follow their thread, you'd want it to increase vagal activity. And so I was like, is that a typo? Or I think this happens a lot in the research. They sound super smart and they use this super smart language, but sometimes I find it hard to follow their train of thought. And what that led me to, I'm going to try this and say this in as least confusing a way as possible, is in my last few years of studying neuroscience at a most basic level. But I will say, I've been a little bit more aware, partially because I have a neuroscientist now on my faculty for my training. And I asked her this question the other day. And it was about pretty much fMRI studies and activation of nerves. And I was asking her, how do we measure that? Because that's always what I want to know. When somebody says we're activating this, what does that mean? So she was like, oh, it's blood flow, and it's, electrical impulses. And there's different things that they can use to measure. And so I asked her a question and I said, do we know if we see increased activity, do we know that that means that they're more skilled, or does it mean that they have to work harder? So, for example, if you are trying to solve a math problem and a part of your brain lights up, does that part of the brain in the fMRI study, is that telling you that you're naturally so good at it that you solve it quickly? Or is it interpreted as you're struggling really hard and so you're trying to use a lot of brain to solve it? And is it clear? And she kind of gave me a, like, in some situations we know it's clear, and in some situations we don't. Like, it was very like, there's a lot we don't know about this. And I think that might contribute to some of this kind of ambiguous, contradictory language. Sometimes I think we're trying to just make a lot of meaning about some of the results of what we see, especially in terms of nerve activation. And there's just so much still out there to learn. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And polyvagal speak is, there's a lot of questions about it. Yeah.
There's major advocates for it, and then there's major critics of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they did mention that in this paper. And they just said it can be explained by polyvagal theory, but they didn't mention that there are, extreme opinions about it on both ends. So, yeah. Well, we don't know. And even the neuroscientist, she even said that. She was like, I do this for a living, and it's incredible how little I know. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful and also confusing, but good in a good way.
Yeah. And that's just why I always...
More questions. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I always recommend, don't read these papers to make a definitive conclusion. Don't say yoga is more effective for recovery than, stretching. Just use these papers to learn a little bit. Learn a little bit about how are we measuring recovery.
Yeah.
That...
Really hard.
And in that alone, it's like, oh, okay, there are specific measures. Okay, so now I'm going to use that word a little bit, with a little bit more conservatism, because it's like, hey, maybe when by recovery, I just mean so I don't feel tired tomorrow, which is different than some of these specific measurements.
Yeah, which is also valid. Like, yes, that's really important. Valid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I enjoyed this one a lot.
Yeah. I know I saw it, and I knew it was for the podcast.
Yeah. Good choice. All right. I don't have anything else. Do you?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Remember to share with your fellow yoga teachers, and let's keep the conversation going about how we can use research to inform and inspire how we teach. See you next time.